Hi, this is Emerald and welcome to the Diamond Net, and today I'm going to be talking to you about how to find your life's purpose. So today's video is all about helping you become conscious of your life's purpose. And what the life purpose is your deepest, truest will of what impact that you would like to have on yourself and others. Now, even more importantly, what a life purpose is not is that it's not a specific implementation and it's not a specific career that relates to your life purpose. The life purpose can be realized in many different ways and through many different mediums. So you wouldn't have a life purpose that's something like teaching or creating things. Ultimately, those are processes. The life purpose is about an impact and oftentimes can be summed up in just one short word. So someone could have a life purpose like bringing about peace for themselves and others, or bringing about mercy for themselves and others, bringing about joy for themselves and others, bringing about understanding and clarity for themselves and others. And once you realize what that life purpose is, what the impact is that you want to have on yourself and on others, then you can implement that in a variety of different ways. So what was revealed to me in the plant medicine ceremonies that I do every spring, so I usually do one plant medicine ceremony every spring, and it reveals to me a variety of different insights about my life or about, let's say, spiritual and, let's say, practical truths in general. And in the ceremony that I did back in 2020, what it made me realize was that my deeper life purpose was mercy, and that this was a constant pulse running through me my whole entire life. Always from the time I was a very small child, always being geared toward wanting to alleviate suffering and bring about mercy in a variety of different contexts. Or I can focus on giving it to myself primarily, or giving it to others. But usually there is a combination of both of those things. So if I wanted to enact mercy, I could, when geared toward myself, I could let myself off the hook when I make mistakes. And if I'm talking to a friend, I could offer to help them, in a way that alleviates some kind of suffering for them. Or I could become a revolutionary that fights for justice so that people aren't suffering so much. Or I could become like a spiritual leader that helps people come into a state of mercy and helps them unburden themselves from suffering. Or I can, in situations where I would typically make myself suffer through things and stick it out, I can give myself mercy in those situations by, being kind and gentle to myself and letting myself off the hook. I could adopt the philosophy of veganism and become an animal rights activist. I could adopt a philosophy where I never kill bugs. I could help someone out who is in need. All of these things are ways for me to enact my life's purpose. So it isn't so much always tied to a career, though it can be tied to a career. It can be just things that we give to ourselves, to our loved ones, or it can be something that we share with the whole entire world. It's really about our own preference as to how big or small we want to go with it. And what I found is that the more that I stay in alignment with mercy, the more that reality almost opens up for me to be able to enact that mercy toward myself and towards others. And what I found is that once I knew my life purpose was mercy and I could stay in alignment with that life purpose, that the universe would almost move mountains to make the enactment of that mercy possible. Now, that doesn't mean that never running into any trials or tribulations. Positive and negative things will always come up. But it's almost like when you find your life purpose, you're getting into the groove, and there is a sense of being guided through that groove. So instead of having to force things a whole lot, it's almost like you get into like this stream of your deepest, truest will, and you don't have to paddle so hard to get there. There's almost a sense of ease that comes along with finding the life purpose in that way. Also, it's important to realize is that the life purpose is not an obligation. The life purpose isn't like, oh, if you don't enact your purpose or if you don't do your part in relation to your purpose, then your life has been meaningless or your life has been a waste of time. Think of the life purpose more as a gift that was given to you. And in this gift, you can also spread that gift to others. You could keep it to yourself. There's really no obligation to do anything with it at all. It's just something that can enrich your experience and enrich other people's experiences as well. But one thing that's become clear to me about the life purpose since I've known about my own life purpose is that the life purpose is a constant pulse that's always coming up in your reality all of the time. So think about it as like a North Star that you're always following, whether you realize you're following that North Star or not. Now, when we become aware that we're following this North Star, this enables us to remove other obstacles and be more conscious and deliberate about going towards that purpose. So it's very useful to know the life purpose. When it's the case that we're following this North Star from underneath the surface where we're not aware of it, sometimes it can lead us off into directions that don't keep us in alignment with that North Star or with that life purpose. So our life's purpose tends to function a bit like a magnet, but the magnetic pull of the life purpose can be obstructed by different emotional and psychological obstacles, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Now, I wanted to explain a little bit about how I came across my life's purpose and how I experienced this. So in a medicine ceremony that I participated in back in 2020, what I had done is, this is the first time I'd ever participated in a ceremony. And I came with the question of, is it, am I supposed to seek enlightenment? Because I'd had different experiences of ego transcendence in the past, and I was wanting to know, should I seek enlightenment? Or am I meant to become fully embodied in this life as Emerald? And so I took the medicine and I waited there on the mat, and I was looking up at the ceiling, and what was happening once the medicine hit is that basically the ceiling started to go away. So it was almost like in between the slats of the ceiling, things started to contract and compress into where there was more darkness than there was the objects that were there. And I realized at that moment that I was dying. And so I laid down on my mat and I let myself die. And I didn't know if it was an effect of the medicine or if I was really dying. I knew I had to let go because the wave of death was coming and I knew that I couldn't fight it. And so I let go. And I let go and I let go and I let go until there was no more Emerald left, and then there was no more reality left. The reality I had existed in had totally been dust in the wind. It had been an illusion the entire time. And there was never a person called Emerald in the first place. And there was this experience of pure emptiness, pure nothingness, pure consciousness. And there was no time or anything like that. And I don't know if I'm interpreting it correctly now in the aftermath, because my mind just has almost a copy of that experience and not the experience itself. But what it seemed like happened is I went into the experience of nothingness and there was no Emerald there. And then within the experience of nothingness, there arose an infinite mind and an infinite heart. And in the infinite mind was coming to know everything so completely and infinitely that had been, is now, and would be. Now there's no time here, so everything exists infinitely in this experience. And this infinite mind, that the point of consciousness that typically sits behind my eyes, was sitting behind the eyes of the infinite mind. And it was coming to know all things that there were to know, and its knowledge was infinitely expanding. So paradoxically, it already knew everything that there was to know, but it was always expanding into new forms of knowledge. And the way that I would explain it is that, let's say that there were certain points of awareness. Let's say that there's an infinite number of, let's say, points to know. And it knew all of those points simultaneously. And then through there, that came the relationship between all of those points, that each shared a relationship to one another. And so there were an infinite amount of relationships between infinite amount of points. And from there came new points of awareness. And it would come to know all of those as well. And it would cross-reference those with the original points of awareness and points of knowingness. And so this is how it was coming to know everything all at once, and also an infinitely expanding knowledge was coming about. So it was very paradoxical, something that I as a human being don't perfectly understand, and that's my best approximation of it. And the way that I would describe it is that it was similar to the human intellect in the sense that there were some similar faculties there. But I would say that my intellect, as it typically is, was a bit like, let's say, a match that had been lit up, just a flame. And then there was a whole entire forest fire right there. So my intellect was that in relation to this infinite intellect. And then along with that infinite knowing came what I would say is the infinite heart. So this infinite loving, coming to love all things so completely, coming to know all things so completely, and loving infinitely in an infinitely expanding way as well. And the point of consciousness that typically sits behind my eyes, so because Emerald wasn't there at all, but the point of consciousness that typically sits behind my eyes was there, and it was taking in everything, and it was really fixated upon the infinite suffering that existed in that experience. And so it was very keyed into how all of the beings and all of the things that it loved were suffering, so greatly and so immensely. And it was suffering all of those sufferings. It was so aware and so conscious and so much in love with these suffering beings that existed in the infinite existence that it's like it couldn't accept that there was suffering. And so at this point, that consciousness in some ways started to split into two. And there was another point of consciousness that was able to handle the infinite suffering perfectly. And what it did is that in order that this other aspect feels better, it would come and it would alleviate all of the suffering that exists throughout all of eternity. But it would immediately re-arise because ultimately the nature of something that's infinite means that you can't get rid of anything. And so then what would happen is at this point of consciousness that typically sits behind my eyes, with its infinite love, would go into like this infinite resistance and heartbreak. And it was just suffering so much, and it was trying to surrender to the infinite suffering that was there. And this other point of consciousness would wrap around itself and alleviate the infinite suffering, and it would feel better. And it went through this process so many times. And eventually, this point of consciousness that typically sits behind my eyes came to surrender and realized that it can't tolerate the infinite suffering. It can't tolerate there being infinite pain and infinite sorrow that can never resolve itself, because that which is infinite has to have everything. And so at that point, there was like this point of consciousness tapped itself out and wanted a finite experience. And this is when Emerald started to be re-remembered. And there was this idea that, okay, let's create this person named Emerald that has a beginning and has an end, and that has limitations and that has imperfections and this type of thing. And at that point, this point of consciousness that typically sits behind my eyes, that was behind the eyes of the infinite, was now put back behind my eyes as usual. And Emerald was reborn into that ceremony once again. And I got to see the reason why my point of consciousness came into existence in the first place. And it answered my question that I came into the ceremony with, which is, should I seek enlightenment or should I seek to be embodied as Emerald? And I realized that seeking enlightenment would just put me back in touch with the infinite that was already too much for me to handle because of the infinite suffering. And being in touch with Emerald, the small self, means that I get to live an experience that is bookended, that has a beginning and an end, where I can appreciate small things and have meaning and have things that are more grounded and more down to earth. And so it really brought me into this awareness that my life path in this life was all about being able to embrace the finite and to embrace the ordinary. And it wanted me to almost live like a hobbit. It wanted me to enjoy the small pleasures of life and to not have to worry about all of that infinite stuff. And ultimately, the reason why it brought its point of consciousness into this experience is that it was an act of mercy to itself. So God was enacting mercy to itself by giving that point of consciousness that could not tolerate the infinite and putting it into finite form as an act of mercy. And so fundamentally, from this before birth kind of thing, there was this sense of mercy is the reason why I'm here as a finite being. And then from there, it was showing me how I can use that mercy. So it's like I existed as God's mercy to itself, but in my life purpose, I can give that mercy to other finite beings as well. So I was given certain gifts of insight and things like this, certain experiences, so that I can understand where people are and understand what people are going through. And this enables me to give people what it is they need to be able to let go of suffering and to be more in a state of mercy. And so this is what it showed me in this ceremony. And it had showed me how much mercy was a constant pulse going throughout my life. So when I was a child, like a very, very small child, when I was 3 years old, I remember I was like watching television with my parents, and the commercial came on that was like, oh, children are starving in the world, donate 60 cents a day to save the kids. And I had never seen one of those commercials before. And I just had this reaction. I was like, I'll give them my food, you know? So there's always been this like deepest, truest impulse to want to bring about mercy and to get people away from suffering. And this has come up many different ways, many different times in my reality. I never realized that it was my life purpose before I had this medicine journey though. But it makes total sense with the things that I would get fixated on. I remember when I was 9 years old, I started to become more aware of my parents' suffering and my parents' limitations. And I would have these fears that I wasn't good enough to go to heaven and that I died and I ended up going to hell, and that the devil would like pry my eyes open, a Clockwork Orange style. And this would be my version of hell. And hell to me was always like, what's the worst thing that can happen to you? And this is what would come to my mind. As I'd be sat down a Clockwork Orange style, and I'd be behind glass, and my parents, you know, would be by themselves, one or the other, you know, behind that glass, and they would be suffering in some kind of way. They'd be being tortured or something of that nature. And I would be seeing all of their suffering and all of their vulnerabilities being driven up to the surface. And this was something of an intrusive thought that I used to have at age 9, where there was just this real fear of my parents suffering and this sense of like wanting to take responsibility and almost like mother them to like, let's say, alleviate their suffering. And then there was also like all sorts of intrusive thoughts, like as a teenager that I used to get, like in my hometown, there was a girl who was murdered back then, and she was buried alive. And I kept having all of these intrusive thoughts about her suffering, and it would really, really choke me up. And so it was that same pattern that was shown to me in that vision, in that ceremony, that basically came through in all of these different experiences. I had just not yet made the connection that it was my life purpose. And so when it comes to finding your life purpose, you want to look for something that's been constantly coming up all the time, over and over and over again in your life, that you just haven't put 2 and 2 together yet, that that's your life purpose. Now, there are also obstacles to being able to realize the life purpose. So shame is one of the biggest obstacles to it. And the reason why that is because shame makes us feel like I'm unworthy, or I'm not good enough, or I'm invalid in some kind of way. And when this happens, we start putting all of our will, all of our attention, all of our energy on trying to prove ourselves valid to ourselves and to others. So if we feel this sense of being invalid, of being one down, we will create lots of different goals to try to run away from that shame. So for example, let's say that I am in a society that really values going into the field of mathematics. So let's say that like that was kind of the thing that you did if you wanted to be smiled upon. And I had this sense of shame, and so I'm trying to utilize the career of going into the field of math to be appreciated by other people. But math doesn't have anything to do with my life's purpose. But now I've gone down this path of following this career path that doesn't have anything to do with my life's purpose, simply so that I can be acceptable in other people's eyes and to learn to accept myself. And so when it's the case that we have motivations that are coming from shame, this tends to muddy the waters. And the reason why is that shame makes us feel so existentially invalid that we can't leave it alone, and that all of our motivations end up getting wrapped up in a desire to run away from shame, or to fix the shame, or to become better than we are, and just basically to run away from feelings of invalidity. So to unmuddy the waters, what we want to do is we want to practice as much as possible being able to accept ourselves exactly as we are. So thinking about the life purpose not as, oh, this is what I can do to fix myself and to become less shameful, but thinking about what we do as being just things that we do because they are enriching to our life, things that we personally enjoy, and to be able to switch our paradigm to recognize that we are already valid exactly as we are, and we don't have to earn anything and we don't have to do anything in order to make ourselves valid, and we literally can't waste any time here. There's no sense that if you don't do X, Y, or Z thing that means that it invalidates your life. All of that is a projection that the mind puts over top of the reality. But the actual reality is that you are already valid simply because you are here. And so the more you can shift your mindset to that, the more you can already feel deserving to go toward your life purpose. And that'll take all of that attention and energy and all of those different forces that obscure your life purpose from you off of the shame. And now you'll be open to being able to sense the more subtle call of your life's purpose. Also, when we resolve shame, this allows us to trust our own will more. When we have shame, it feels like, oh no, I can't trust my will. I'm a broken clock. I'm not good enough. Why would I listen to me and what I want? I need to look to somebody else to figure out what I should do because I'm a broken clock. I'm a broken compass. When it's the case that we resolve the feeling of shame, then we get the sense that our will, our deepest, truest will, is a valid source of motivation and is a valid internal compass. And it's from that internal perspective that we can find our life's purpose. We can't find it by looking out to somebody else or figuring out what should I do. If we're looking outside of ourselves, we won't find our life's purpose. Our life's purpose is always coming up as an internal pulse. And so we have to be very, very much in touch with what's coming up in our inner world. And we have to trust that as a valid source of wisdom, which can only be done by resolving shame. Now, one thing that's important to recognize when it comes to motivation is that there are 3 motivational reasons that we tend to have for wanting to go in a certain direction or wanting to do something. So one is for the process of it, the other is for the product of it, and the third is for the identity building piece of it. So with the process orientation, those are things that we generally like to be engaged in. We enjoy the process. The process itself is meaningful to us. That means even if the product didn't come about, we would still want to engage in the process. Now, a more product-oriented focus is about, what do I want to be the outcome here? What do I want to be the impact here? And then when it comes to the identity, a lot of this can be based in shame because we're trying to build identities of goodness in order to keep ourselves away from feeling invalid. But when it comes to the identity piece, we're trying to build an identity by saying, oh, look, I'm the person that achieved this, or I'm the person that did that, I'm the person that has this quality, or I'm the person that looks this way, or I'm the person that does that thing. And so some of our motivations, or many of our motivations, can come from that identity piece, but a lot of that identity-based motivation actually gets in the way of our ability to attune to our deeper life purpose. So there are 3 different processes that I'm going to share with you to enable you to get more in touch with your life purpose. And so the first process is to be able to look at all of your motivations and to be able to sort them into these 3 categories. Are you doing it because you're trying to engage in the process? Are you going toward it because you want the product? Or are you going toward it because you're trying to build an identity of some kind? Now, when it comes to the life's purpose won't necessarily be reflected in the identity piece at all. So when you write things down in that list of, oh, I want to be the person who does blank, or I want to be known as this person, all of that can go aside because those usually won't have anything to do with the life's purpose. Now, when we look at process and product motivations, these can tell us quite a lot about what our life purpose is. Now, the process motivations can be a little bit of both, where it's basically our processes are where these are the things that we enjoy. This is how we like to engage in things. So we can find a lot of good information about how we want to implement our life's purpose once we find it. But it can also give us little hints about what our life's purpose is. And that's not in every single case, but let's say if somebody's life purpose is to bring joy and they really, really enjoy the process of telling jokes, then there's an indication as to what the life purpose is, but then there's also an enjoyment of the process that brings that about. So the process side of things can be used to glean meaning about what the implementation is and the life purpose itself. Now, with the product focus, this can show us what types of impacts we want to have on others, or what types of impacts we want to have on ourselves. So we can mine the product-oriented focus to figure out what is it that we really want to give, what is it the impact that we really want to have on the world. And chances are, if you account for all of your motivations and you look at all of your process and product-oriented motivations, you can find a common thread that's coming through there, things that you really want to bring about. So see if you can glean your life's purpose from that. Now, the second process that I'll share with you is to turn all of your shoulds into wants. So the reality is that there's no such thing as a should, and there's nothing that you absolutely have to do. So everything you have to do is actually something you want to do in disguise. So let's say, for example, I say, oh, I have to go to work. Right? So the reality is that I want to go to work. And why do I want to go to work? Is I want to go to work because I want to continue to make money. And I want to continue to make money because I want to continue living the same lifestyle that I do. And I want to continue living the same lifestyle as I do because I want to avoid experiencing discomfort and displacement. And, there's probably deeper wants that I can find from there as well. So whenever it's the case that we convert our shoulds into wants, we get a deeper sense of which direction our will is moving. Because really, the sense of should or have to, those are total illusions. The reality is that everything that we're doing is related to a deeper want that we have. And if we can draw those wants all the way down to the core, we can figure out what's really the motor of our motivation. And that's where we can start to key into our life's purpose. Now, this might take some digging to find it because we have a lot of surface level wants. It might be like, oh, I want a fancy car, or I want $1 million, or I want a house. Well, ultimately, those are surface level wants, and you can find deeper layers of wants that are there. So let's say if I look at I want a fancy car, maybe I want a fancy car because I want people to admire me. Well, why do I want people to admire me? Well, I want people to admire me because I want to feel a sense of connection and importance with others. Well, why do I want to feel a sense of connection and importance with others? It's like, well, I don't feel like I feel very important to others, and I don't feel connected to others. And, so then I can kind of start to explore deeper and deeper and deeper until I really hit the deepest core reason why I really want the things I appear to want. And a lot of times this upper layer of things that we want are not necessarily things that we actually want, but are things that are an approximation of what it is that we truly want deep down. Now, one of the things to keep in mind with this is that there are two types of motivation. There is positive motivation and there's negative motivations. So it's about going toward what is wanted and going away from what is unwanted. So we can look to both our wanted and our unwanted outcomes to glean information about what our life purpose is. My life purpose was displaying itself over and over and over again about the resistance that I had to suffering and not wanting suffering. And so it's almost through the negative reflection of that I find that what I want the most truly and what I want to give to the world the most, to myself the most, is mercy. And that brings us to process number 3, is to look at what is deeply unwanted. So looking at what it is that you have the most resistance to, what it is that you most want to change, what it is that you want to least experience yourself and have other people least experience. This can be a strong sign of what your life's purpose is. Now, it's not always the case. Sometimes we're trying to get away from things that it's really important that we face with, and that maybe there are deeper, more positive motivations to go through, and generally that's the way we want to think about our motivations, about going towards something. But sometimes when things are deeply unwanted, it can give you some real hints about what it is that you really truly want to realize for your life's purpose. Now, one of the things that I would say is that when you're enacting your life's purpose, it's about embracing the life's purpose itself, but also the opposite as well. So a lot of my experiences in the springtime when I do my medicine ceremonies have been about dropping resistance to suffering and being able to hold space for suffering. I also have had some dreams where it was about the relationship between mercy and suffering. So there was one dream that I had where I went up into this attic space, and there was a man who had a bunny rabbit, and he had a circular table saw, and he was like torturing the bunny rabbit with the table saw. And so what he was doing is he was feeding the bunny rabbit into the table saw very, very slowly from behind, you know, from the tail end. And he kept doing this, and the bunny rabbit was suffering. And so what I had to do in the dream is I had to take the bunny rabbit from him, but I realized the bunny rabbit couldn't be saved, and so I had to put the bunny rabbit through the table saw face first so that it put the bunny rabbit out of its misery. And so in this, it was showing me this tension between mercy and suffering, and how in some ways I have to, let's say, hold space for the suffering component of things along with the mercy component of things. So when it comes to the life purpose, there's almost a need to drop resistance to whatever is the opposite. So let's say if your life purpose is something like joy, it's like you might also have to do a lot to focus on sorrow. If you're so resistant to sorrow that it gets in the way of your ability to be joyful yourself, or if you're so in resistance to suffering that you're not able to access mercy yourself, then it's not a very strong actualization of the life purpose because you're out of alignment with it. So a big part of connecting to the life purpose is to be able to connect with it and its opposite. But you can find that through connecting to what is deeply unwanted, and you can start to work through your resistance to that while also, you know, committing yourself toward bringing about whatever the life purpose is. Anyway, so that's all I have for you for now. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, go ahead, click the like button below and subscribe, and leave me a comment down below. Also, if you would like to learn about shadow work, I have a free shadow integration masterclass called the 6 Simple Steps to Shadow Integration, and you can watch that now at shadowintegration.org/masterclass. Anyway, that's all I have for you for now, and until next time, keep becoming more you.